Session with Meenakshi Reddy Madhavan. Meenakshi, Parvati and Devangana are going to sign their books after the session outside their bar hall at the book signing area. You can grab your copies and they'll be signing it after the session. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for making it, and thanks you all for being here. This is a session that is really close to my heart because I firmly believe that I am a writer today only because I read so much as a child. It's just, some words resonate so deeply within you that you feel as though you've always known them, whether it was Anne rolling up to Green Gables or Swami stealing pickles from his mother's kitchen. All these people who were part of my life, even though I only knew them from between the pages of a book, made me who I am today. And I think today's children are luckier than I was because they don't just have to read about the lives of little white girls and boys. They actually have Indian authors talking about Indian things and in ways that you can relate to. And it's so important to have characters that represent who you are. I'm going to start with a question related to the title of our panel, The Child Within. It's so important to stay in touch with your inner child, especially when you're writing for children. How did your inner child convince you to start writing? Deepa, I want to begin with you.
Okay, thank you so much, Meenakshi. Well, how do I connect with the child within? You know, the child within you is always there. Frankly speaking, it's always part of you. But, you know, the way I connect most is through my memories, my own childhood memories. And that is what I started with when I started writing for children. And that incidentally happened because my own children were very young. So in that sense, I was connected with children, and it came very naturally from watching them, listening to them, reading the stories that they were reading. And that's what really motivated me to reach out to the child within me. And as I mentioned earlier, there was all the unanswered questions from my childhood that became my first stories. And going back to my childhood, remembering how I felt, what I had experienced, though, you know, it was a completely different point of time. But there's certain things which are always universal, like, for example, friendship or family relationships. And to begin with, that's what I wrote about. And then also, as Meenakshi rightly said, the stories that you read as a child, that is what, you know, makes you into a writer. So a lot of the literature I had devoured as a child, I think, helped me to connect well with the child within me.
Hello. So I think sometimes when we talk about children, almost as a corollary, we talk about, you know, protecting them. And so, you know, when it comes to reading, for example, sort of standard practice to have some books kept on higher shelves or some books that are not, you know, appropriate for children or they should be kept away. Or, you know, I was just thinking about this the other day, you know, all these anti-CAA protests that are going on. A lot of the discourse around that centers on, you know, whether children should be present, not present, they should be sort of protected. And in fact, Samina Mishra had written a lovely article about this in which she said, childhood is not a separate compound from the world. And so the thing is, I think children, it's not so much protection, but what children require is a sense of comfort and security. And once they have that, children are actually far more open to the idea of exploration, adventure, risk, than adults, because they don't know what anxiety, they haven't learned to be anxious yet, they haven't learned to be fearful yet, they've only learned to be curious and to go out in the world. So when I sort of started writing for children, I think that that was the impulse, because for me as a kid, I was not sort of physically particularly active. I was the kind of kid who, when I got my glasses when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I was delighted because this was my ambition to wear glasses. So I loved reading, and it is in books that I found all my exploration, all my adventure, all my ability for freedom. And that was, I guess, the sort of child to whom I was then writing.
Would you like to comment?
Yes. I will repeat. I had a similar life like Parvati, that I too wasn't very active as a child. I loved reading. So when I write books or stories for children, I try to relive my childhood. And also I think about what I would like to read if I were a child now. And as an adult, what I would like, what kind of stories I would like to tell the children. Like, for example, when I was writing Jwala Kumar and the Gift of Fire, which is my first book for children, the dragon, that is Jwala Kumar, in my book, he goes around helping people, because I just saw that the dragons in popular imagination are violent creatures who breathe fire and destroy towns and people. So I thought, why not we should have a peaceful kind of a dragon who helps others. So these are the thoughts which I try to pay attention to when I write for children.
I like that a lot, writing what you find an absence of in bookstores. Devangana, would you agree that's the reason you started writing as well?
Yeah, in fact, I did not read the favorite books I have right now as a child. I got introduced to them much later. And just how Parvati said, that the sense of exploration that comes in a child, I think everybody in the arts strives for that kind of a childlike quality, where you're constantly curious, where you're constantly exploring, and it's so difficult for us right now to achieve that sense. So that's how they say that it's the purest form of your personality, because children are so pure and they are asking questions, they're not hesitant, they're not thinking I'm going to look silly. So there's so many barricades we put. And also how we operate in when we are with children. I feel we are much more forgiving, we are much more, even if we are irritated, we can just keep everything aside and keep all the barricades aside and just be patient with them, be kind. And something that has always stayed with me, it's one of my favorite books, The Course of Love by Alander Bottom, and so many people must have read it here. He says something great. He says that we live in a world where we are kind to children, we're nice and kind to children, and it's a wonderful world. But imagine a world where all of us are kind and nice to the childlike part of each other, which is being vulnerable, which is being asking questions. Like, I can just be irritated with a friend right now, she's asking too many questions, just go away. So that, I think we all strive to be that, to kindle that child within always. Yeah.
I'm interested in the way you said pure, because my books are for teenagers, and they're complicated beasts, teenagers. And I think across the board, we've all written for different age groups. Some of you have written for adults, it's your first book, so it's a picture book for, what age group would you say?
Yeah, 6 to 8, but relatable to
exactly.
a 4-year-old.
So let's talk a little bit about the few of you who have written for adults as well as children. How do you find it different? Hansda, do you want to start?
The only different thing that I do while writing for children and for adults is I use different Word documents. That's all I can say. I mean, no, it's not different. I mean, writing is writing. That's all.
You don't find any difference at all between writing for grown-ups and writing for children?
I never gave it really much thought.
Maybe I've read your short story collection.
Yeah.
It's quite dark. And your children's book is quite light.
Jwala Kumar is also a bit dark. But yes, while, in my stories for adults, the darkness does not really end. While in my children's book, the darkness does end. Yeah.
Parvati, do you find the same optimism?
Uh, I have found, I think the one, like in one word, I think the difference for me, I mean, I had written 2 books for adults and then I wrote my first book for children. And in one word, the difference was momentum. Like I found when I was writing for children, I had to have, like it had to move. And I don't mean just that, just that it had to be action-packed or something actually has to be happening, but that every word has to be there for a reason, and there has to be a bounce in it. There has to be some excitement in it. It has to be doing something to you at every moment. And that you don't necessarily need to do, although I think we should for adults, but we don't necessarily need to do it with adults because you allow yourself far more indulgence and space.
But I know you've written about the Mughals for both adults and children. Did you find that you researched less for the book on kids because it was so much smaller? Again, it's gone.
Hello? No, certainly for the book on for children was a far simpler. It was a far simpler story. I mean, I was just telling, a little story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and whereas in the book on Jahangir for adults, because I'm trying to bring in as much different complication, nuance, interpretation, different ways of seeing as possible, which would not work in a children's book. So in that sense, that I would not go into tremendous levels of research because required. But of course, I need to know what I'm talking about when I'm writing for children. It's just that I can leave much more out when I'm. But the essence of it has to be there.
Go on, Deepa.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add, that when you're writing for adults, you are writing from what the person you actually are at the moment. And when you're writing for children, you have to think as a child, imagine yourself in a child's world. And I think that is the biggest difference, apart from language as well. It's your sentence structure, these are the technicalities, the craft. And I've had this experience sometimes that if I've been switching from writing a book for adults to a children's book, sometimes my editors have to pull me up and say, oh, your sentences are too long. So these are the different aspects of switching from the age groups, I'd say. And that is within children's writing too. Between the text you create for picture books, the text you create for a chapter book or a middle grade reader, and the story you're writing for young adults, which is going to be pretty, it has to have some darkness in it to make it absolutely credible and identifiable for a young, a teenager, has to be able to see themselves in that story that you have written for them, reflect their reality, so to speak.
Also, I think for me, I don't know how this worked for you, Sowvendra, and for you, but I found that my writing for adults improved as a result of having written for children, because of this momentum, because of this narrative drive, because of the having to tell a story as well and as entertainingly as possible. Some of that energy then came into my adult writing as well, and I enjoyed that.
I want to talk inspiration for a second. I want each of you to talk about your books a little bit. We'll start with Devangana. What inspired you to write the book that you've written currently? Your first.
Yes, this is my debut book. My book is The Jungle Radio. It's a picture book for very young children. Actually, luckily, I started working on this book when I was in design college. I did it as a part of a project, which was researching on, we were doing learning material for children in the space of environment and conservation. And I went to the beautiful forests of Bandipur, and it was monsoon, and you know how you're in student mode, you're always, everything is a calling, and you're just looking for a subject. And that's how, so my story is on birds, the wild birds of India and their sounds. So it is there when I was engaging myself with rural schools there, and I was talking a lot to them about what they perceive of nature around them, what is their relationship with them. And my first idea was to, and writing was my way of expression, and I'm an illustrator and I'm a designer by profession, so that was how the pictures were my mode of expression. So I took visual storytelling as my mode to convey a story I wanted to. So that's how it started. But previously I had worked with an NGO, which was, I was working in a school in a slum in Delhi, and so my engagement with children was already on. And that worked out. I actually sat on that book for 6 years. I wasn't sure if anybody, because internationally there are books like which actually make a child very sensitive to the environment or their engagement to the world around them. So yeah, that's how it all started. And then I started working as a book designer, and slowly I got that confidence that, okay, maybe this is the time to put it out. And I refined the book all over again. I did every single page again. And yeah, then that's how it came out.
Okay, talking of inspiration. Well, you know, inspiration can come from so many places. Sometimes it's an overheard sentence. Sometimes it's an incident that somebody shares with you. Sometimes it's just some interaction, some child's play that you watch. And sometimes it's an image that suddenly pops up in your head. So talking about a book of mine which came out last year titled Blessed. Now, Blessed is somewhat different from some of the books that I've been writing. It's a fantasy. And it began with an image of a girl being led away to an underground chamber. And I just couldn't understand, why did this image come to me?
It's pretty dark, I have to.
You read the book, huh? It's a dark book because it reflects a reality. And then I just started writing the book. And there was something at the back of my mind, and this is a book which took me years. I kept starting, and then because of the darkness perhaps. And I remember the time when the Taliban had stopped girls from going to school. And that really troubled me, that why is it, what is it that they don't want girls to be educated? And then, of course, there's always a stray incident in the newspapers, and there was a news report about a girl being shot in Bihar, actually shot, because she wanted to study after class 10. She wanted to continue with her studies, and her family didn't feel it was appropriate, and when she tried to make a stand, she was just, killed. So that is the story behind Blessed. A girl living in a society where it's a sin for girls to learn how to read and write, and how this girl, my protagonist, Lentra, she's born with a gift. The way children learn how to speak, she can read and write, but she has to conceal that gift. And then there is also the other theme of sibling rivalry, which my editor felt, it will disturb people. We are a society, we celebrate Rakhi and Bhaiya Dooj and things like that. But I said, this happens in families. And it's a lot of the time, it's the brothers who, they protect their sisters' honor. So they would like to keep girls between certain
A lot of
bounds.
the hatred does come from within the home as well, I think. Sometimes, not all the time. Parvati, would you like to talk about your inspiration?
I think there were maybe two things. The most recent book is a book on 1857, which introduces some characters from 1857. But I didn't want to just tell that story in the past. I wanted to locate it in the present. So basically what happens is that the two sisters who discover this sort of magic ability to summon historical characters into their lives, and then they have little adventures with them. And so I think there are two levels of inspiration. One was, I will say, my own sister. So I think from my own memory of childhood, some of the most fun sort of exploration adventures that I had were with my sister, and that sort of sibling bond that exists and that allows you to do things together. That I remembered when writing. And the other thing was to try and introduce kids not so much, to 1857, of course, but also to history, as because it's strange. It's a sort of strange paradox that we have today. We have a situation in which for years, two subjects that are widely considered very dreadfully boring in school, unavoidable, maths and history, right? And I think for similar reasons.
Make a book about maths fun. I will read it.
As Isaac Asimov, written some fun books on maths. So I thought, and the reason. Abstract, the equations in math, history don't seem to lead anywhere. And yet at the same time, we have a situation in which history has become one of the most contentious subjects in the world that we inhabit. So the hope was by introducing these characters and having them summoned by the sisters and interacting with them in their daily life, to suggest that history is more accessible than we think, that we can access it, and that it is also it can be made relevant to our lives more easily than we imagine.
Yeah, I get that. Did you have similar inspirations, Hansda?
Yes, now that we are talking about our books, I want to say something about Deepa. Deepa Agarwal is an author I have been reading since when I was in school. And the first time I met Deepa was in this hall. And today I'm sharing a
Don't
space.
hate me, but me too.
Okay, so my first book was Jwala Kumar. It was about a dragon who helps people, and I got the inspiration from it. I was suspended at that time actually, so I too was going through a bad phase. And my hometown is called Ghatshila, and there was a 7 days continuous rainfall there. Some cyclonic something, and there were dark clouds in the sky, and I was inside the home. I was watching Game of Thrones season 1 on Hotstar, and then I saw dragon, and then this thought came to me, why don't I create a dragon which actually helps people instead of just burning them? And so that is how this book came, and it was published by Speaking Tiger. My publishers are here. And my next book is, and this book had very lovely illustrations by Krishna Bala Shenoy, black and white illustrations. I love illustrations. And my next book for children will also be a book a picture book actually. It is called Who's There? And it is based on, it is a retelling I have done of a story I used to hear from my family when I was a child. It is about a ghost couple and their children. And,
Spoiler.
Not much, just an teaser. And this book has very lovely illustrations by Anupama Apte. And this book will come in March 2020. And I have another book, another picture book coming, which is called Sumi Budhi and Sugi.
Someone who never wrote for children until last year, you've just dived right in with both feet.
Actually, I'm enjoying writing for children.
So is that it now? Is that your career just going to be children's writing?
I cannot say, but I hope to write more books for children. So my third book for children will also be a picture book. It is called Sumi Budhi and Sugi. And this was inspired by, I used to travel from my hometown to my medical college in Jamshedpur. And at the bus stop, I used to see this elderly lady and her pet goose who used to follow her around. So this is how that story was born.
That's cool. I like the whole bird history connection that we've all got going on. So recently I was a juror at the Crossword Book Awards for children, and they gave a joint statement, the people who won, all the shortlisted authors, saying that we don't like the way that kids' books are treated in India. They like the stepchild of Indian publishing, and in order for your children to learn more, to absorb more, they need to be readers. So why are children's books given this second-class treatment? I want to toss that to the panel. Do you think kids' books are given like this second-class treatment, or is it everything's changing now and things are getting better?
No, it's definitely a fact that, well, we are like really children of a lesser God. I don't want to sound self-pitying, but that is the situation, that people think that writing for children is something very easy. And I've had people coming and asking me, "Acha, bandar ki kahani likhte hain aap?" So, you know, of course, I've written stories about the monkeys, but, you know, it's a complete story. It's not just, that's easier to write for children because you use simpler language. You have to work pretty hard on any story that you're writing, whether it's for grown-ups or whether it's for children. And, you know, I've been writing for about 35 years and I've seen changes, and I think attitudes are definitely changing.
For the better or for the worse?
I think for the better. You know, the thing is, I'm an optimistic person. The fact that there are many more young writers going in for children's writing, that shows, that I feel that shows that people think of it as a desirable profession or activity. And definitely because books by Indian authors are being circulated more. Because when I began, there was only one main publisher, Children's Book Trust, and little by little more publishers came into the field, international publishers came into the field. Then when Scholastic came in, books were going directly to schools. So there was an awareness of, you know, indigenous writing, which is actually about the children's own lives. Because the thing is, I mean, when you write, it's wonderful for children to have access to all kinds of literature, but the thing is, they have to have stories about the lives that they lead, their experience. So I think things are improving, and the very fact that we are sitting here at the Jaipur Literature Festival discussing our books, I think it means that it's...
I hope you're right. I also think that children might be harsher critics than adults because they can tell instantly when they're being condescended to or, you know, patronized in any way. Devangana, you work in publishing. Yes. Tell us the publishing perspective on children's books.
Yeah, it's definitely changing, like she said, like how it's like, there's actually a mix of the two, because sometimes people also tell me, but you're a picture bookmaker, you're not an author. And then I have to really calm myself down and then give them a lecture. But yeah, because it's not taken super seriously, and especially with picture books, which is another level of children's literature, because there's little text and pictures do most of your talking, which is very hard to do, because it doesn't mean that you've not researched your subject well or something. Simplifying something is the most difficult thing. So like the question directed to Parvati was also that, you know, it doesn't mean that she did not research that well on 1857 just because she was writing for children. So publishing is definitely getting there. I feel it's with some of the publishing houses and so many new imprints coming and so many new publishing houses setting up their space solely dedicated to children, and especially art for children's stories. That's great. And slowly, even literature festivals of all kinds are giving spaces to children. Because it's a very tricky audience we deal with, because your reader is never your direct buyer, you know, like it's depending on your parents, it depends on your teachers, and so many times children have come to me during session and said, "Ma'am, I'm carrying only 500 rupees and it's over now, how can I buy a book?" So, you know, because they do not have that pocket money to like directly go into a bookstore and buy a book. So the marketing of the book, the packaging, that all depends on your publisher, and so they have to be your guiding spirit and back your book really nicely.
Don't you find it, one of you can also jump in, don't you find it's kind of dominated by mythology as well a lot? I was in a bookstore the other day looking for a present for a friend's child, and all I could see was wall-to-wall 100 Tales from Hinduism, you know, Ganesha as a child, and I'm like, where are the books that I'm looking for imaginative stories for children that may or may not have to do with mythology? It just seems to be like that's the market nowadays.
Yeah, before I hand over the mic, very recently I was at the World Book Fair in Delhi, and every year, because I work in publishing, I work with Penguin Random House, and I was there on duty, and I am very enthusiastic always to recommend books to parents or teachers or library people who come in, and they always go for something they know, or something like, oh, give us a mythology related book, give us a religious book. Slowly it's changing. There are also parents who come and experiment, and they would want your advice that what is the new thing that you have in the market. But yes, parents do have a preference towards something that tells them about that.
No, definitely, you know, we have a very traditional mindset. It's very good to believe in your heritage, but we also don't want to, parents in particular, they feel, oh, our children should read the stories that we read in our childhood. And they're not comfortable with something new unless it's a series that has come from the West and is extremely popular. And that's why sometimes, you know, it's a little depressing for a writer when an editor says, oh, original Indian fiction doesn't sell. And most of the time when publishers are asking me to write a particular book, it's either mythology or it's a biography or something on a historical theme. And last year I made up my mind. I said, no more mythological stories for me, because I've written so many of them. I'm tired of doing retold books. I want to tell my own stories. And not too many publishers and editors are willing to take the risks. And I see it in the sales, you know, when the royalty statement comes, I can see the stories about gods and goddesses and the myths are more popular.
It's slightly odd. But I guess if your parents don't read, then how will they buy books for children based on stories they know, right?
But there is also a strong pedagogical imperative in, you know, like in books generally, even for adults. I think, I mean, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but even for adult books, the difference between fiction and non-fiction is quite stark, you know, because non-fiction, the idea is that you're going to learn something from it, whereas fiction, you know, storybooks are just sort of an indulgence that you're giving yourself, and that possibly applies in children's books too. Or it could be also, as we were talking, I was thinking, it might be that it, you know, now, I mean, at a certain point, these stories would have been told to children at home by parents or grandparents, or, you know, now that families don't work like that anymore, people don't have the time, maybe it's sort of easier to go out and people are looking for a book to buy. And I wanted to add also about this, you know, what you said about how the children they don't have their own money to spend. Though I do think, I mean, I have had a lovely experience writing for children and, you know, going out to schools and everything and reading to children, and that whole experience is very, very energizing and a lot of fun. But the money, but you know, sometimes you get this sudden view of, you know, where the priorities are. So a lot of schools now, I think, are very keen to have authors come and do talks and readings and all to their children. And one school had gone to where, you know, they laid out a whole, like a book fair, the whole table full of books and all, except the kids had a limit on how much they could spend, which was 250 rupees, you know, which is really, I mean, ridiculously low. You can barely buy one book with it. And later on I was talking to the teacher, and they were telling me about all the different sort of extracurricular activities that there are. And there are lots of things, sports, swimming, this, that. And amongst them there's, you know, an annual trip abroad for the senior classes. So for 10 days or a week or something, these kids go off to Europe or America or where it is. And I said, how much did it cost? And they said, about 3-4 lakhs per kid for 10 days in America as a learning experience. But at the same time, you have this 250 rupee limit on the book. So there are these contradictions still. But I think on the whole, I've had a very positive experience in all respects.
Should we move on to marketing? Hansda, I want you to talk a little bit about, this is the bane of all of our existences, promotions. I think all of us, this is great fun. I love JLF, but there was also the option of sitting at home watching Netflix in our pajamas and not thinking about deadlines that we're all avoiding. But yeah, does marketing matter? Or does it differ from adults to kids' books? And how much do you think that it matters at
I think
resales?
marketing matters, but am I the right person to answer this question?
You must have marketed both the
Yes, I
4
talk
books.
about my books. I've given interviews about my books. That's all I can say here.
I think, Parvati, you want to talk about the school book fairs and
Yeah,
stuff,
no,
right?
I love it. I love going to schools and I love reading to kids. My books are for class ages about 7, 8, 9, maybe 10. And the kind of energy that you can get from children, if the reading goes well and if they enjoy it, and because children are brutal also, if they do not like what you're reading or they're not enjoying it, it is apparent in a second. They've switched off, and not only switched off, they've turned around and wandered out into the corridor. But when it works, it's such a pleasure because the intensity of concentration that they have. Adults just don't have it, and so I love going to schools. I love reading to them. I discover also how much more intelligent children are than I, and how sometimes precociously intelligent kids are these days. I was doing a reading recently about this 1857, which I usually conclude with a little workshop on, your favorite historical character will come to you, imagine that person and let them, if there's some problem you have, how will they help you, some little thing like that. And my little kid, an 8-year-old at the back of the class got up and she said, Miss, and I said, what? She said, this is a classic conflict resolution plot. And I said, all right. Now I've been put in my place. Just go.
It seems that they really, you're not teaching them anything, but they are teaching you something. And sometimes they are asking, it's absolutely as if they're interviewing you for a job. That's why I feel, but I love that they are engaged enough and curious enough to, actually interact with you like that. And the questions never end. But one thing I'd like to add, when you're talking about marketing, definitely, maybe it varies from publisher to publisher, but publishers will put in more effort into marketing a book for adults. And that has been my experience.
The whole stepchild syndrome all over again, huh? Maybe it's easier to market books when they're highly illustrated. I know Devangana want to talk a bit about working with illustrators. I want to talk to all of you about working with illustrators because unlike books for adults, these are books that rely very heavily on pictures to move forward. Hansda, do you want to start by talking about your illustrations?
Yeah, I have been very fortunate to have really wonderful illustrators who have worked on my books, who I have collaborated with, like Krishna Balashenoy, who illustrated, Jwala Kumar. Okay. I sent emails to him giving the details of what I had in mind when I wrote this book and how this place should look like. And he did just that. He put my thoughts into his images. I think the same with Anupama Apte, who's done the illustrations for Who's There? And I'm very happy with the work that she has done. So I'm very fortunate to have...
Do you draw yourself at all?
I draw myself. For example, my next book is coming from Duckbill, which is now a Penguin imprint. And I was... it's going to be a series called Hook Books. So Paru Anand, Asha Nehemiah, Jerry Pinto, and I. The four books by us are going to start this new series. So all of us were, I think, asked by Duckbill to draw an image of a platypus, duckbill platypus. So I drew a character called Daku Billa Singh. So this is basically duckbill cut into two words, Daku and Billa. I have the illustration here. I think I should have sent this file. Oh yes, oh yes. Just a moment.
I don't know whether you all can see. All right, just hold that up so that can you guys sort of squint at it? No, no one can see. Okay, find him afterwards and he'll show you the picture.
This is basically a platypus in a Daku dress with a gun slung on his back. And the mascot for Hook Books is a Havaldar called Havaldar Hook. And this Daku, this is a very subversive kind of a Daku. He is what you call it, threatening the Havaldar Hook, beware, here comes Daku Billa Singh. So this was my imagination. So yes, I draw.
Devangana, I believe you had some slides to show us briefly of the...
Yes, if the slides can be on, I'd like to. But coming to your first question, which is if illustrated books are easier to sell, I feel there's a challenge there because fully illustrated books are mostly very difficult to produce because so much ink goes into it, the production cost is high, immediately the cost of the book goes high, so it's been tricky in India, but slowly that's changing. So what you see right now, I'm also an illustrator and a designer, so I've made paintings in this book, so some of the spreads here. And illustration is such a key part of children's books. My book is of course a picture book which relies heavily on pictures, and it's for a very young audience, so if you can see the text is really big. And this is a book called Twice Upon a Time we did with Payal Kapadia, and the illustrator is Sandhya Prabhat, and books which have their only text. Your text is basically being the visual. So illustration really, of course it supports your text, even with recently Deepa's recent book, The Forbidden City, Journey to the Forbidden City, and 1857, Ratu and Puri, Parvati's book. They were happening in front of me by this fantastic illustrator, Meghna Menon. And like scene by scene. So in their case, the story basically gets an extension through the pictures. Scene by scene, you are transported to the past. You have beautiful scenes from the past, beautiful nostalgic hues. So that's where your illustration really supports your text. Whereas picture books, they solely depend on you. You know, I read this beautiful thing by Maria Popova where she says, once you go through a picture book, it should change your emotional temperature. You know, because your visuals are doing everything. And complex issues, complex things are being spoken about through pictures. So yeah, it's a hard job to do, definitely. And but yeah, children really relate to the pictures. They even in my book, even a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, even if they can't read the whole sentence, they can put a finger on the image of the bird and then read out the sound word. So
cool.
Illustrations.
That is very cool. Deepa, do you want to comment on this, and then we will break for questions, I think.
Okay. Yeah, just I'll comment briefly, on working with illustrators, and special reference to my very recent book, which was launched yesterday, Journey to the Forbidden City, which is a non-fiction. So, because I was really very anxious about, getting the right sort of images, because I had, this is a project I've been working at for years and years. So I had a lot of images, photographs, which I had scanned from the books that I had read on the exploration of Tibet. So I scanned all those images and sent them to my editor that, please, this is something, a pointer about the costumes, about, of course, the landscape and all you can find online. And then I recall there were wonderful illustrations. Meghna has done a fantastic job But there was one illustration in which I felt the boat was not the right type of boat, because in Tibet they use these yak skin boats. And I had mentioned it, and I was a little up when I saw it. I saw it's a kind of a raft. So I said, yeah, please, we have to have this as authentic as possible. So I did more of a search, and I found several images of yak skin boats. And now I feel it's a beautiful image of mountains and a woman, because the situation was how in a particular area, the men were very lazy, and the women did all the work. They even wiped the men's noses for them. So I just love that image. No.
Sure, but we should also think of your questions. And hang on, do you want to add your lines?
One line to Deepa's how she's saying. So that's how important a relationship is between your artist and the author, because the author is, of course, the soul of the story, and they should, for the artist, the biggest challenge is to then communicate the same thing into paper. So the relationship between the both, and how, especially in non-fiction books where you have to send references and you're capturing some historic period, then you send, needs to carry that authenticity, which is, so that teamwork needs to be really cracked, I feel. Yeah.
All right, who has questions? Should we go in the front row? There's a young, there's one over there. Okay, you.
The writing part of the, for children. So as a writer, as a child you would have experienced so much of memories and experiences, but to write to a 21st century kid from another generation or from an earlier generation. So how, you, as a child, within your as a child you will think, but how could you transform that generation gap? Like you can think like a child, but of course you are writing to a children of another generation. So how does that generation gap is, as a writer you could...
Okay, that's a great question. How do you bridge the generation gap? And I think especially for me, who was a child so long back. But, you know, it's interesting that what I use is the language, and when my daughters were younger, I would make them read my stories, and, you know, I asked them if the language, particularly the conversations, the slang, was what they actually use. Though of course I'm listening to them all the time, but when they speak to their friends, they'll be speaking in a different manner. Now, certain things, certain situations are universal, as I said earlier too. But as a writer, I feel I have to be very, very observant and listen to children all the time. Now my daughters are grown up, but I have grandchildren. And then as Parvati was talking about visiting schools, you know, that's where you interact with children and you know what the child of today is interested in, what are there, and some anxieties will not change about the pressure of performing, marks, and the things like bullying. You know, these things remain constant. Basically, what you're doing is you're changing the setting, and you know, the background that you're presenting will not be the school that I went to. It will be the school that, just to give one example, the school that my grandchildren are attending these days, and the situations, you know, somebody snatching your lunchbox and things like that, that remains more or less similar.
Go on.
So my question is mainly that being a reader myself since childhood, I've been encountered myself with comics especially. So in today's world, how do you think that we can make quality literature accessible to the kids out there? Because we can see the kids not being very much inclined to the books these days. So how do you think that books, quality literature or books in general can be made accessible to each and every, not each and every kid, but to the maximum kids out there to develop that reading habit? How can we help as individuals?
How
can we help as individuals in creating or inculcating that habit in them?
I mean, in the sense, I wouldn't contrast comic books with quality reading. I mean, like reading is reading, and reading is basically an exercise of the imagination, right? And that's what children do when they read, and that's the fun of it. But I also agree with you, yes, that children's books should be made accessible. In terms of both price and availability, as widely as possible. But what to do about it? I think the publisher may have an answer.
No, I feel, to answer your question, I think it's very much accessible. You were talking about quality literature. I think there's amazing literature out there for children, which publishing houses are supporting. So I feel it's out there. It's just, if you have to see the right thing. And the book fairs happening, all kinds of bookshops now have a different section for children. So it's all about, I think a lot depends, there's a responsibility of your educators and your parents also to, steer you towards that and take you probably away from the phone.
Okay, we had the gentleman at the back over there on the right, I think, right? Was that? Yeah, over there. Let's move it around to the back a little bit.
Hello, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. Obviously with children's books, you're balancing two different art forms. You're balancing the writing and the illustrations. And storytelling, you don't want to say, you don't want to be redundant within the two art forms. You don't want to say the man picks the apple and then have a drawing of a boy picking the apple. I wonder, how do you balance those two art forms to tell a cohesive story without being redundant with the art and the writing?
That question was for if sometimes the weight you give to words and images, is that something like that? Yeah, I feel, again, there are two categories. If you're dealing with a picture book, for example, that striking that balance is key. Because picture books is also, though it's universal, it has a crossover audience, but the design and the art is always done keeping in mind a very young audience. And basically picture books work with the concept of brevity, that less is more. So you have very little text on every page and let your art mostly be your main source of expression. Whereas, like I said, the books they have done, all three of them are mostly proper stories which have a lot of text, but they're supported with illustrations. So that becomes the role of the designer, and also it also has the role of the publisher and the author. If they want illustrations, how much percentage of the book they want to be illustrated, that is also a call they make. And of course the target audience, if it's for a very young child, it's likely to have a lot of illustrations. The more you go up, you will probably use very minimal motifs to express, if that's right.
Good evening. I wanted to ask, what according to you is the actual essence for a book of children?
An actual essence, it's the hard work that the author or whoever that author collaborates with, the illustrator or anyone, the hard work that they put, I think, that is, the actual essence, the effort that they make to, to give to a child, that gift of a story or an experience. Because a book can be an experience. So this is what I think.
The one at the very back over there. Did you give it someone over here? Sorry, I can't see this side at all. Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah, I'll do that. Hi, thank you so much for this. My question was mainly, I often struggle, especially when I attempt to write for kids, or if I were to write a book for a child, I feel like something I'd stumble upon is the dilemma between dumbing something down versus simplifying something, right? Whether you talk about the structure of the language itself or the narration of a concept which is sort of esoteric for a child, but you want to bring it down to them, either using illustrations or words. So how do you what are your strategies that you use as writers to sort of not dumb down a concept, but to simplify it so it's more expressive?
Just to, I think what because just just vocabulary, right? That's just a simple answer. Like, depending on what kind of vocabulary a child has, that's the vocabulary you'll use. But I think it's not a question of dumbing down, it's a question of getting to the heart of it. So recently I was also speaking to Shomak Ghoshal, who's just written his first book for children. It should be out later this month. And it's a picture book, and it is about a young boy. It's called The Story of Piku. It's about a young boy who loses his mother. And I think it's about 450 words. Maybe 20 odd pages. It's a very, very big, disturbing, right? But he deals with it beautifully. It's this sort of beautifully warm, affecting book full of love, and he doesn't do it by dumbing down the emotion or the pain or anything, but by addressing it, head on. And I found that in writing for children particularly, the greater the honesty of your effort, the better you connect and the better you're able to get your point across.
I think we have time for maybe another one question. One last question. Who is it going to be? There. Can you see him? Yeah.
So my question is it really right to classify books on the basis of age? Like Parvati ma'am said, that my books are basically focused on the age group of 8 to 9 or probably 6 to 9. So is it really right to... I mean, I still read Ide Blyton and Mark Clary, so is it okay to...
Why do we classify? Well, the thing is, reading levels, and this is a very broad classification. Children have different levels, but taking it as an average. Taking the average child, you have to classify books according to age, because a child will have, a smaller vocabulary. As children grow, their vocabularies keep growing, and also concepts. And then again, every book has to come out from a child's experience. That's what I feel. And I think that's what is universally accepted. That children's books definitely should grow out of a child's experience and what is happening around them. So you cannot have the same, but there will be precocious children. I remember I was reading books for adults by the time I was 11 and 12. But again, you will find an 8-year-old. I was talking to a 9-year-old, and he said, I don't think I can read Harry Potter books because it takes me very long to read one page. But on the other hand, their parents, in groups, readers' groups, bragging, my 7-year-old has read Harry Potter, which seems like a bit of a burden to lay on a 7-year-old. So it's about understanding, it's about language, it's about experience. But again, I would say the boundaries can be blurred, and they are a lot of the time.
On that note, we're going to close up.
We wish to thank all our speakers, Devangana Dash, Deepa Agarwal, Hansda Sowvendra Shekhar, Parvati Sharma, and Meenakshi Reddy Madhavan. Meenakshi, Parvati, and Devangana are going to be signing their books at the book signing tent of the Bar Hall, which is on your left. Grab your copies from the bookstore. Thank you.
Is to bring in entrepreneurs from India and really plunge them and immerse them into the Silicon Valley so that you all get exposed to this interesting new way of thinking. The entrepreneurs that come through Rajiv Circle are stellar in their own right. So we really don't have to do anything. All we have to do is just maybe put them in touch with the right people, and most of them take things forward on their own. This Rajiv Circle Fellowship started about 3 years ago, and the purpose of doing that fellowship is to bring in entrepreneurs from India and really plunge them and immerse them into the Silicon Valley so that you all get exposed to this interesting new way of thinking.
Coming up next at 5:15, we have the Poetry Darbar. But before that, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our sponsors. Z, the title sponsor and author book signing area, will be part of the Z kiosk at Front Lawn. Nexa, associate partner and venue partner, Front Lawn.